Hey, and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So you're deciding to either make a new character for the first time, or you're just making an alternate character, and you're wondering what race should you choose for that character. Well, it shall largely depend on your class, which you will choose then second. You need to then keep in mind which role you're going to be. Cleric is a DPS or healer, Barbarian is a DPS or tank, Warlock is a DPS or a healer, a Rogue is pure DPS, a Fighter is DPS or a tank, a Bard is a DPS or a healer, a Paladin is uniquely a tank or a healer, a Ranger is pure DPS, and also a Wizard, pure DPS. So based on that, we need to choose our race. You can see different races will give different benefits. Usually they give 3 different benefits, the human being the unique one there, just giving that versatility of a big boost to all your different statistics. And you can see that all throughout these races. Some of them will be locked and you won't be able to use them on your characters. Now don't worry too much about them, as you will see that you can generally get away with an unlocked race. Now the difference between the races are pretty minimal, and generally you only need to worry about this in endgame when you're totally min-maxing your character, but from the get-go people can be obsessed with min-maxing right from the beginning, and since you're making your character, you've got to choose your race as literally the first thing, so we may as well start off on the right foot right there. Let's start out with creating a tier list of these races on which I deem the best for a DPS character. So I have this tier list maker here where I have all of these given races. So we first start out with the Dragonborn. Well, this Dragonborn has the ability to receive 5% more incoming healing, a bonus to any 2 ability scores of +2, and a bonus 3% critical strike and 3% power, and the ability to choose exactly which ability scores you want for your class. So we're going to have to put that Dragonborn, and it's pretty much one of the best races from the get-go there. Next up we have the Human, and this one just has the pure ability to give 1% to your offensive and defensive stats, that giving you a total of 10% there. But as a damage dealer, we just want those offensive stats, and as your ability scores, you put +3 in any one of them. That puts the Human on average, as it's not exactly as good as the Dragonborn. It doesn't give 6% offensive stats, and you're also going to miss out on 1 ability score there, since you only get 3 from the Human, whereas the Dragonborn will give you a total of 4. Then we go to the Half Orc, and I'm ranking this one again just in average, and the main reason is it gives that critical severity there. You can see the total of 5%, which is good, allows you to deal more damage on a critical hit, but critical severity is usually pretty easy to obtain, and it's not exactly the stat you want to prioritize on. Usually that would be your critical strike or your power or even your combat advantage. And then you are limited a bit on the ability scores by choosing dexterity, constitution, or strength. I will make a video upcoming about which ability scores you should be using, as it has changed a bit since my previous video, and again your race will tie into that, so we put the Half Orc on average. Next up we go to the Azamar, and for a DPS this isn't too great. You can see the only offensive stat it's going to benefit you with is power, and only by 2%. Does give you the universal does give you the versatility of where to put your ability scores, and otherwise it will give additional hit points to your nearby party members. Decent, but not going to give you much more damage. So unfortunately, we're going to have to put this down in poor. Then the Gith is a very good race to choose. You can see it will give you 5% to your combat advantage. As long as you're flanking your target, you have an ally on either side of it, you will deal that 5% extra damage based on your combat advantage. And then your ability scores again are a little bit limited, but generally dexterity is good for all DPS classes, and strength is then good for your melee characters, and intelligence is good for your ranged classes. So you get that versatility there, whether you're melee or ranged, which is very good, and thus we're going to put the race as one of the best there as well. Fortunately, this is also a locked race. Next up, we have the Wood Elf, and it'll give you a 5% bonus to crit strike. Again, a little bit limited on your ability scores, and Wild Step won't really affect your DPS whatsoever. However, since it gives 5% critical strike, we're going to put the Wood Elf in good along with its ability scores actually being somewhat useful, especially for your ranged DPS classes with the bonus to intelligence, your magic DPS classes, excuse me. Next up, we go to the Moon Elf, and this really isn't too useful. You can see the only DPS benefit you're going to gain is 3% more action point gain. As for ability scores, you're again pretty limited. You could, of course, again use this with a magic dealing DPS class. That would be intelligence and charisma boost there that I would take. And we're going to have to put this Moon Elf just in bad there, because the only benefit it has is action point gain, which you generally don't need, and the ability scores are pretty limited. Next up, we go to the Sun Elf. This again is somewhat of a good boost with 5% bonus to action point gain. Ability scores, again, you're a bit limited, and unfortunately I'm going to have to throw this again with the Moon Elf in bad. Since action point gain isn't a priority as a DPS, you can generally easily get enough action points for your daily power every minute, which is when you need it. Dwarf, you can see, just has a lot of defensive abilities there, so not really good for a DPS class, of course, unless you're making some hybrid build, but I'm generally going off the fact that you want to be having all of those offensive stats so you can actually fulfill your role, particularly dealing more damage. Next up, we have the Halfling, and again, you can see it's just a bonus to deflect. That's a defensive rating. Ability scores, again, pretty limited, and then just bold with reducing that control resistance. Again, sure, good for a tank, but not really any good for a DPS character. So again, we're putting it in bad. Next up, we have our Half Elf, and you'll see it does have the ability to give +2 of an ability score depending on your class. Now this, I have made a chart, and you can see depending on what class you are, you'll gain that +2 benefit to either dexterity, intelligence, or if you're a fighter, it goes into wisdom. So based on that, it's not really good. And the ability scores, again, themselves, just the bonuses here to con, charisma, or wisdom, are pretty limited. And then knack for success is only going to give you a 3% boost to crit severity. So it's not the worst race you could pick up, but we're going to have to go and throw them into poor. Next up, we have the Tiefling, and it does have the benefit of giving pure damage boost, but 5% only when your target's below half health. So overall, that's like a 2.5% damage boost. Of course, if you stack this on a rogue, it can add up to a bit more with you having abilities that can do more damage based on how full your hit points of your enemies are, and just dealing more damage there with, let's say, your Gloaming Cut. Infernal Wrath is good as well, but it's again only going to reduce the damage that your target's attacks deal, so it's not going to give you any boost in damage. So we're going to have to put the Tiefling in average. It is a good damage boost, and it's the only race that actually gives a boost to pure damage. Next up, we have the Drow, and it has its Dark Fire, reducing the defense of your enemies. That's pretty neat. Again, this is only going to proc at a 10% chance, so not exactly too often, but as a DPS character, your primary focus is on hitting things, so you can generally get this procced off fairly easily, but its bonus to deflect severity makes it not so great. But because of that debuff ability, you can basically increase all your party members' damage due to them all benefiting from that extra boost in damage by the reduction of defense on the target. Next up, we have the Menzer Brands and Renegade, which is basically like the Drow, but with a little bit less effective Dark Fire with Fairy Fire, basically reducing their defense by 3% and also the damage of their attacks by 3%. Again, limited on your ability scores. It will depend on what class you are. Whether you're magic or physical DPS. You take physical for strength, and you take intelligence for magical. And honed defenses, it's just another boost to deflect severity. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit less version than the Drow. They basically fulfill the same role, and if you're just trying to deal more damage, the Drow is a bit better. Finally, we have the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, and much like the Dragonborn, it's pretty much the same, except you can see you gain a 3% boost to healing from all spells and a 3% boost to your max HP, meaning you can take bigger hits better. Whereas with the Dragonborn, you only gain a 5% boost to your incoming healing. So the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn is a little bit better, but we don't have anything better than best, so he also goes there into best. Again, this is my chart for all those DPS races, and my tier list of which ones you should prioritize. Ideally, you'd have a Dragonborn, Gith, or a Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn. All of those, unfortunately, are actually premium races and you have to pay for them. Otherwise, of course, just go for a Wood Elf or any of the following average ones. Don't recommend any of the ones below poor. Of course, again, if you're not totally min-maxing, all of these will just give you a few percent damage boosts, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. Next up, we're going to move to the races you should be choosing for all of those healer characters. Your cleric, your bard, your paladin, and even your warlock. Which race should you choose to enhance that healing? So again, we've reset our tier list, and let's go through each of these races and I'll rank them again on which ones I deem the best. Again, with the Dragonborn, it gives a boost to crit strike and power, both of which are very good for healing. So this Dragonborn is again going to have to be best for healers. Keep an eye out on your ability scores. As a healer, you ideally want to slot them into dexterity, charisma, or wisdom. For a human, again, you have that versatility of putting the +3 wherever you need it, and then your versatile defense giving you 10% boost to your statistics, but again, only going to be 3% of them are going to go to your extra healing. That will be your power, your critical strike, and your critical severity. Keep that in mind, which makes the human, again, just on average. Next up, we have our half-orc. And this does have a boost to critical severity, which will boost heals, but unfortunately its ability scores aren't really great there. Dexterity, but we can't really use constitution or strength. Constitution does have action point gain, but it's very minimal that I wouldn't really worry about it. But since it does have a boost at least to critical severity, we're going to again put him on average. Next up, we have the Azamar, and this is really good for a healer. You gain the boost to power, outgoing healing, incoming healing, defense, and maximum hit points. You gain a bit of survivability boost and also a boost to your extra healing. That's a 4% boost there. Then you choose wherever you want to put your ability scores, and you'll also buff up the survivability, which since as a healer your role is to protect your allies, you'll gain that boost to all of your party members of their maximum hit points, 2%. So we put the Azamar as pretty much one of the best there to be using. Next up we have the Gith, and again with this giving the boost to combat advantage, which doesn't benefit healers, it's not really great. Its ability score spread there again is not too good either, and thus we're going to have to put the Gith into pretty much one of the baddest ones to choose for a healer. Next we have the Wood Elf, which is pretty neat since you gain a boost to critical strike, which you really need, and you can also gain that boost to dexterity and wisdom, which are two good ability scores for healing. So we'll go and put that into a very good race to be using. Next up we have the Moon Elf, which does have a boost to action point gain, and if you can cast those daily powers a little bit more often, that can be pretty good. But the ability scores giving a boost to intelligence isn't great. Charisma and dexterity you can use pretty neatly. So unfortunately this Moon Elf is going to have to go into bad. It does have action point gain boost, but 3%, there are definitely better ones out there to be using. For example, the Sun Elf. It'll give you a 5% boost. Again, its ability scores aren't the best, but because action point gain is pretty important for a healer, we're going to put that into an average race to use as your healer. Next up, we have the Dwarf, and again, this is primarily focusing around defensive things. 5% boost to your defense. Ability scores, again, the only one you'll benefit from is Wisdom, unless you want Constitution for a little bit more action point gain. So again, I'm going to throw the Dwarf into that bad area. Not great to be using whatsoever. Then we have the Halfling, who gain a boost to deflect, ability scores aren't great, and bold isn't either. So unfortunately Halfling is also going to have to go into bad. Then we go to the Half Elf, and again if we look at that chart you can see that you're going to gain boosts to dexterity there for paladin, warlocks, and for clerics you're going to gain intelligence. So for a paladin or a warlock, it can be okay to choose just for that extra boost to a ability score based on your class, but then it gains the ability score bonus of Constitution or Charisma and Wisdom, which are pretty neat. More action point gain from Constitution, and that for success you gain 3% critical severity. Overall, not the worst you could choose, so it's going to put it into poor there. Then we have the Tiefling. A boost to damage is no point whatsoever for a healer, but Infernal Wrath can be pretty useful, just reducing the damage of the target. Unfortunately, we don't hit a lot, so we can't really gain that benefit very often on those enemies. So that again is going to have to go into bad. Then we have the Drow, and with its Dark Fire, it can be pretty good. And if you're in a trial or something where you do generally use an at-will to attack the boss all the time, since you only have one target to attack, you can get this procced off, albeit not too often, but sometimes when it does matter, which means that this race could potentially go into poor there, along with the Mentabrands and Renegade also going into poor with its Dark Fire. You can gain that extra survivability boost as well by reducing the damage of their attacks with the Mentabrands. And as a Drow, people will like you if you proc this off and give them that extra damage boost by reducing their defense with both of these. As for their ability score spread, it's not too bad. You gain dexterity and wisdom, or even charisma if you need it. Deflect severity, unfortunately, from both of them isn't going to be too useful. Lastly, we have the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, and again, much like the Dragonborn, it has that bonus 6% to your offensive stats that you need for a healer. And also, you can put your ability scores wherever you need them. As for the Metallic Ancestry, it again is very useful just for that little bit of boost in your own survivability, which you'll need to make sure you're alive so you can keep healing. So again, here we have our healer races racial spread, and this is my again tier list of where I would put them. So here is the tier list again of where I would rank all those races in terms of the best to the bad for your healers, prioritizing your Dragonborns and also the Azamar. Again, all of those unfortunately are premium races, the difference being very, very minimal. And the Wood Elf then you would pick, or the Human, Half Orc, or even the Sun Elf if you just want to go for those decent races for a healer overall. So finally, we're going to go to what ones you should be choosing for your tanks. Your tanks again being the Barbarian, the Fighter, or the Paladin, the one with only 3 options for tanking. So which races should you be choosing? So here we have the Dragonborn, and it'll give you a boost to incoming healing, which is not too bad. And again, the versatility of where you put your ability scores, pretty neat, but a boost to all of those offensive stats you don't really need as a tank, at least when you're trying to maximize your survivability. So we're going to have to throw this Dragonborn into not really a great one to choose. It does have the boost to incoming healing, which you can definitely make use of. So we're going to have to put him into poor. Then we have the Human. It can be very good for a tank just because you gain 5% to your defensive stats and an ability score bonus of wherever you want to put it. So I'm going to put the Human as one of the best just because of that versatility. You get a boost to defense, you get a boost to offense, and you can put ability score points wherever you need them. You can throw them into Constitution for a whole chunk more of hit points. Then we go to the Half Orc. Again, it's primarily boosting up your offensive stats, crit severity. Your ability scores not really great there. You can throw in some to Constitution, but then Swift Charge, not really great either, but I guess it can be useful in an AoE fight when you just want to make sure you get to the group of enemies first. But overall, I'm going to have to rate this race as not good to use. Then we go to the Azumar, and this is actually very good to use as a tank. Gain a boost to incoming healing, defense, and maximum hit points, along with boosting up your party members' maximum hit points, which means I'm going to have to put this one at one of the best also to be using. Then we go to the Gith, a boost to your combat advantage, some ability scores where they aren't really useful at all, but a boost to your stamina gain can be really neat just to regen back that shield so you can block a bit more. But otherwise, I'm just going to have to rank this guy as pretty poor. Doesn't have much of a boost to your tanking abilities. Same with the Wood Elf. The only benefit there would be the resistant to slows on your movement, but that again not being very useful. So I'm going to have to put Wood Elf into bad. Next up, we have the Moon Elf, and I'm going to have to put her again into not too great to use. Does have a boost of stamina gain and action point gain, both useful to a tank, but otherwise nothing much else. This can be a viable choice, but it's pretty poor. Then we have the Sun Elf, again a big boost to your action point gain, 5%, but other than that, ability scores are not great, and the Sun Elf Grace 10% resist to controls. Doesn't really play much viability within the game right now. So I'm just going to put it into bad. Action point game, by all means, if you're making a build for that, then choose it, but it's not too important for a tank. Next up, the Dwarf, a big boost to your survivability through 5% defense. Ability scores are very good as well, Constitution, and then you can take Strength for extra stamina gain, and Stand Your Ground, also reducing resistance to knock and push. So with that boost to extra survivability, I'm going to put the Dwarf into also one of the best to use. Next up, we have the Halfling. You gain a bonus to Deflect, a good defensive stat, and then your ability scores are not too great. Dexterity, it's just going to get move speed and critical severity, and then charisma you can definitely make use of, or constitution. And bold, just 10% resistance to control effects. So the halfling is not too bad to use, and I'm going to have to put it into definitely a good race to choose. Then we have the half elf, and again, when we look at that spread of stats there, for a paladin tank you're just getting dexterity, for a barbarian tank you're just getting intelligence, and for a fighter you're just getting wisdom. So all of those there just are offensive stats primarily, so you're not going to make much use of that 2 extra ability scores. And then your ability scores down here, you could take Constitution and Charisma, which I do recommend for a tank, and Knack for success, you're getting that deflection of 3%. Not the worst you could choose, but again, I'm just going to have to put this one into poor. Next up, we have this Tiefling. It can be pretty neat, reducing the damage that your targets will deal, but again, they're going to have to hit you a lot. But as a tank, that actually happens a lot. So you can get this procced off depending on how often the enemies hit you, and basically boost up your survivability there. Again, taking Charisma and Constitution as your ability scores, you can pick the right ones there. So Tiefling is not a bad choice at all, so I'll put it on average. Next up, we have the Drow. It has its Dark Fire, reducing the defense of enemies, giving a boost to damage to your allies, a boost to defect severity, and then a boost of your dexterity. And charisma is not too bad. Dexterity you don't make much use, but again, it's definitely not a bad choice at all. And because of its buffing ability and to reduce the enemy's defense, I'm going to have to put it into good, because that's generally what you want to be doing, is improving your allies' damage so you can get through the content a lot easier. Next up, we have the Renegade. Again, another boost to defect severity, and also reducing the enemy's defense along with reducing the damage of their attacks. So we're going to have to put that one into average. Not as good as the Drow at just purely debuffing the enemy's defense, but the Renegade does have the boost through that survivability as well, and thus I'm going to put it into average. And finally, we have the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, which is pretty good, having its boost to maximum hit points and incoming healing, but outside of that, it just has a boost to those offensive stats, but it does have the versatility of where you want to put your ability scores. But overall, not the best choice, and I would again just put it into average. So that sums up my choice of tank races. Now, I am a bit conflicted as to where I would put the Drow and the Renegade. Perhaps I would switch them. And the same with the Tiefling. I could rank that a little bit higher along with the Sun Elf for the action point gain. But overall, I'll just stand to my points here. These would be my recommended races for you tank characters. Again, if you don't agree with anything that I've said, or you have other thoughts and opinions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We all have our own different opinions, which makes this world an interesting place. If we agreed on everything, then it would be pretty boring. With that said, hopefully this has been somewhat insightful and helpful to you guys, especially you newer players who are just creating your characters and wondering what race you should be choosing. There are quite a lot to choose from within this game right now. Of course, many of them can be locked, so I wouldn't recommend really going for those locked races unless it's the last thing you want to do for your character. You've already got it like maxed out and you want to switch to the ideal race to choose, then by all means purchase a premium race if you've got the spare Zen, or you just like the look of the race. Let's say you like looking at like a Dragonborn, a big buff guy with a Drake head. With that said, again, hopefully this has been somewhat helpful to you guys. And lastly, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of my channel members for helping me keep my channel going. And if I present this well, consider leaving the video a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.